I didn't expect to see her there. Not in the cramped, warm-smelling back room of the bookstore. Sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a loose knot like she'd been unpacking boxes herself. My friend had said his mom helped out sometimes. But I'd pictured someone distant, polite. Not this. It was late afternoon. The store was quiet, just the hum of the heater and the muted shuffle of paper as she sorted receipts. I'd come to drop off an old poetry book my friend had lent me. She looked up when I stepped in, the kind of look that pauses you mid-step. "Alex, right?" she said, already certain but giving me the chance to confirm. Her voice had this low warmth, the kind that made you feel like you were already inside the conversation before it began. I nodded, suddenly aware of the scuffed shoes I hadn't cleaned in weeks. "Come in." I was just about to. She stopped, glanced at the clock, then back at me. "Actually, you drink wine?" I blinked, half smiling. "Yeah, sure." She disappeared into the tiny kitchenette at the back. I heard the cork pop, the faint clink of glasses. When she returned, the bottle was already breathing on the table between us, 2 half-filled glasses catching the gold from the desk lamp. She handed one to me without ceremony, like this was just the natural next thing. Then she raised hers slightly. "To new beginnings," she said, not quite looking at me. Her eyes hovered somewhere over my shoulder, like the words weren't entirely for me. I repeated it back, quieter. Our glasses touched, and the sound seemed too loud in the stillness. She sipped slowly. I did the same, tasting something faintly sweet but unfamiliar. We talked about the book I'd returned, or rather, she talked and I listened, throwing in the occasional question just to keep her voice going. She had this way of circling a subject, never quite finishing a thought, as if the meaning was in what she left unsaid. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, stretching slightly, and her sleeve slipped enough to show a thin silver bracelet. I caught myself staring before I realized I was doing it. "You're quiet," she said, not accusing, just noticing. "I'm listening." Her smile was small, almost private. "Not many people do." Something about the way she said it made the air between us feel different. Not heavier exactly, but tuned, like a note still vibrating after being played. A car passed outside, headlights sweeping the shelves. She glanced at them, then at me, as though measuring whether the moment was over. It wasn't. When I stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly, only for a second, to steady the wineglass I'd almost knocked over. The touch wasn't anything, not really, but it left my skin aware of itself. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of wet pavement. I walked slowly to my car, the taste of the wine still at the back of my tongue, the echo of her voice in my head. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. The next time I saw her, I was on my knees in the back room, sorting through a box of second-hand hardcovers. My friend had roped me into helping for the afternoon. "Just lift the heavy stuff for my mom. She'll appreciate it." She was at the counter, sleeves rolled again, hair loose this time, a pen tucked behind one ear. I caught her watching me drag the box closer. "You don't have to do that," she said. "It's fine," I answered. "I'm already here." She gave a small nod, but didn't smile. I got the feeling she wanted to or used to smile more easily, but now it took effort. For the next hour, we worked without much talking. The store was quiet except for the muffled rain against the windows. Every so often, I'd hear her hum under her breath, low and almost without melody, like she was keeping herself company. I noticed her hands when she reached for a stack I'd finished. Long fingers, nails short but neat, a faint ink smudge at the base of her thumb. She didn't rush. She handled the books like they were fragile, even the battered paperbacks. When she finally spoke again, it was almost to herself. "Some of these came from a teacher's collection. He used to write notes in the margins." I looked up. "You know him?" She hesitated, tapping the pen against the counter. "I did. A long time ago." Then she set the pen down and changed the subject, asking about my classes instead. Her laugh came unexpectedly when I told her about a professor who always mispronounced my name. It wasn't loud, but it was real, and I found myself trying to think of something else that might make her do it again. Later, while we were shelving a row together, I reached for a book at the same time she did. My hand brushed hers. Quick, nothing deliberate, but she withdrew like the spine had burned her. Not sharply, just enough for me to notice. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. She nodded without looking at me, her gaze fixed on the space between two books. We finished in silence after that. But as I was leaving, she followed me to the door, leaning lightly on the frame as the rain softened outside. Her hair caught the light from the street, a few strands curling near her cheek. She seemed like she wanted to say something. Her lips parted just slightly, then pressed together again. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was almost closing time when the rain turned from steady to punishing, the kind that blurred the windows into sheets of gray. I was leaning on the counter, half drying a stack of damp returns, when she came out from the back with 2 mugs of tea. "You'll never make it home in this?" she said, setting one in front of me. Steam curled between us, carrying the faint scent of something herbal. "I don't mind waiting it out," I said. "Besides, you shouldn't lock up alone." She gave me a look, part amusement, part something else, before sitting on the stool across from me. The store felt smaller in the dim light, the rain pressing in on all sides. For a while we just talked, not about anything that mattered. Weather, music, the stubborn leak in the back room she'd been meaning to fix. But her shoulders had lost some of their usual tension, and she leaned forward on her elbows, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corner of her eyes. Not age so much as evidence of a life fully lived. Halfway through her tea, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, and I caught the flash of a man's name I didn't recognize. The way her expression changed, a tiny tightening around the mouth, made me think I wasn't supposed to have seen it. She didn't answer, just turned the phone face down and wrapped both hands around her mug like it was something steady to hold on to. "You okay?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment too long before nodding. "Just people from before." She took a sip, eyes shifting away. "Nothing worth keeping." There was a quiet after that, not uncomfortable but heavy. The kind where you can hear your own pulse. Outside, the rain lashed harder, the streetlight across the road flickering like it might give out. When she reached across to move my empty mug, her fingers grazed mine. Not an accident, but not quite deliberate either. I didn't pull away. I thought about saying something then, about asking her who that man was, about why she looked so tired when she thought no one noticed. Instead, I just held her gaze. Her breathing slowed. Mine matched it. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, "You should go now." And I did. But only my body left that room. I hadn't seen her in a week. Not because I didn't want to. She'd canceled twice, both times with short, polite messages. By the third, I stopped asking. When I finally walked into the store again, she was alone, standing by the front table, sorting through a box of newly arrived books. She looked up, surprised, and for a moment it seemed like she didn't know whether to smile or not. "You've been busy," I said. She nodded. "Things to do." Her voice was quiet, not cold exactly, but clipped. I helped her unpack without asking. The afternoon light was fading, casting the room in that soft gold that makes dust look like it's floating. For a while, the only sounds were the sliding of cardboard and the faint tick of the wall clock. Halfway through, I caught her watching me. Not the casual kind of glance you brush off. This was held deliberate. I stopped, the book still in my hand. "What?" I asked, but it came out softer than I meant. She shook her head, but didn't look away. "What are we doing, Alex?" It wasn't sharp or accusing. More like she'd just said it to herself and I happened to be there to hear. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't sound like I was lying, to her or to myself. "I'm just here," I finally said. "Helping." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in disbelief. People don't look at each other like this when they're just helping. The clock ticked once, twice. My pulse felt loud in my ears. "I don't want to mess things up," I said. It was the only truth I could manage. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "But not. Mess up what? There's nothing here to mess up." The silence after that was heavier than anything we'd said. She turned away first, picking up another book, thumbing its cover like it mattered more than the conversation. I set my own stack down, leaning against the table, watching her shoulders move. There was something fragile in the way she kept her back to me, like she was holding something in by force. I started, but stopped. My throat felt dry. "I just don't want to stop coming here." She didn't turn around. The light outside dimmed into a deeper shade, the shop sinking into shadow. I could feel the distance stretching between us, even though we were only a few steps apart. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. It was raining again when I stopped by. The shop was open, but dim. No music, just the faint hum of the heater. She was sitting at the counter, not working, just staring at something in her hands. When she noticed me, she didn't do the usual polite greeting. She simply tilted the object toward me, as if I'd been part of the conversation already. It was a photograph, creased, edges soft from being handled too much. A man stood beside her in it, younger versions of them both, smiling at something outside the frame. "This was my husband," she said, matter of fact, though her thumb traced the photo's edge like it might fray without her touch. "He died when I was 32. I didn't know what to say. The air in the shop seemed to shrink, like there was less of it to breathe. "I don't talk about him," she went on. "Not because I can't. Just because people start treating you differently, like you're fragile or broken." She placed the photo on the counter between us, her hand still resting on it. "You remind me of him sometimes." The words landed somewhere I wasn't expecting. Not as flattery, but as something heavier, something I wasn't sure I could carry. I wanted to ask in what way, but the quiet in her eyes told me not to. Instead, I leaned on the counter, close enough to see the faint moisture along her lower lashes. "Is that good?" I asked. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "It's complicated." She paused, looking down at the photo again. "It's not fair to you." We stayed like that for a while. The rain against the windows filled the space where our words couldn't go. I found myself memorizing the curve of her hand over the picture, the way her fingers flexed slightly, like holding on to something that could slip away at any moment. When she finally moved the photo aside, she exhaled slowly, as if the air had been trapped in her for years. She looked up at me, and there was no guardedness, no retreat, just the bare truth of her face. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years, and for the first time, she looked at me without fear. It was after closing. The shop was empty except for the smell of old paper and the faint ticking of the clock above the register. I'd stayed to help her lock up, or maybe I'd stayed because neither of us seemed ready to say goodbye. She was behind the counter, counting the till, her movements slower than usual. I leaned against the doorway just watching. "You don't have to wait," she said without looking up. "I know," I said, and I stayed. After a moment, she set the cash aside and rested her hands on the counter. Her fingers tapped once, twice, then stopped. Whatever this is, it's not simple, Alex. I know. I'm not who you think I am," she went on. "I'm older. I've made mistakes. I've been other people's regret before." I stepped closer, the space between us shrinking until I could see the faint tremor in her hands. "I'm not looking for simple." Her eyes lifted to mine, and something in her face softened. Not like a wall falling all at once, but like a door unlocking from the inside. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to find the words, and then stopped looking for them altogether. We stood there in the small quiet of the shop, the rain from earlier now just a memory in the air. She reached for the edge of the counter, but her hand brushed mine instead. She didn't pull away. For a long time, that was all, her hand resting lightly against mine, the warmth of it sinking in. It wasn't a kiss or a confession, or anything anyone else would notice. But in that stillness, everything between us was answered. She let out a breath and stepped out from behind the counter. We didn't move toward each other. We just stood close enough to feel the shared air. She leaned her forehead lightly against my shoulder, and I closed my eyes. No promises, no declarations. Just the quiet truth of two people who had run out of ways to pretend this didn't matter. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down. And that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. It's been months now. I don't go to the shop as often, not because I don't want to, but because I've learned that wanting isn't the same as needing. She still runs it the same way, methodical, quiet, always with one light left on after closing. Sometimes I stop by just to help with the boxes, sometimes just to sit at the counter while she works. We don't talk about that night or the ones after. We don't need to. She's different now, though. Not in any way you'd spot from the street, but in the way she carries herself. Lighter. Not smiling all the time, but not guarding every smile like it costs her something. And me, I don't look at people the same way I used to. I see the pauses, the spaces between words, the weight someone can carry without showing it. She taught me that, or maybe I just learned it because I was paying attention. We never labeled whatever it was, still haven't. It's not about claiming or defining. It's about the quiet mornings when I bring her coffee and she lets it go cold because we're too caught up in talking about some book neither of us has read yet. It's about the way she still reaches for my hand when she's tired, like it's just a habit she doesn't want to break. Love, if that's what this is, isn't the fireworks people write about. It's the steady light in a room you didn't know you were sitting in the dark for. It's the silence that doesn't feel empty. I think we both came into this expecting it to break. Maybe it still could. But what we have now isn't fragile the way I thought it would be. It's lived in, earned. And sometimes, when the shop is quiet and she's pretending to be too busy to notice me watching, I remember the first time she poured me wine and said, "To new beginnings." Back then, I thought it was just something people said. Now I know it was a door she was opening. For both of us. So, maybe this isn't the story you expected. It's not the one I thought I'd be telling. But it's ours. And if you've ever found yourself in the middle of something you can't quite name, maybe you know what I mean. What would you have done if it were you?